Immigration is in the news every day in virtually every country on earth. We are familiar with the plight of illegal immigrants, refugees, those seeking political asylum. Immigrants are welcomed, shunned, deported, courted, depending on the politics and needs of the country. Have we lost touch with one of the most basic reasons to emigrate, to seek a new life free of social constraints and class or race prejudice? I'm Carol Harmon, your host for She's Leaving Home, readings in 3 voices by Medwyn McConachy, aka Janet. Medwyn McConachy is a writer and fibre artist living on Salt Spring Island off the west coast of mainland Canada in a tiny home with an art studio. She was born, raised, and educated in England before emigrating to Canada in 1966. She is a graduate of the Writer's Studio at Simon Fraser University in Canada. Little did she imagine when she left England that she would have a successful career in management, then become a writer and fibre artist. She would live in cities, the north, and on an island. She would become a witch and change her name of address from Janet to Medwyn. Medwyn reads 3 excerpts from her series of creative nonfiction, memoir-based essays about her life from her late teens in England to late 20s in Canada. Each essay is written from the point of view of a family member, friend, or the young girl she was then. We begin with Medwyn reading from An English Secretary, written in the voice of Janet.
An English Secretary. My somewhat inglorious failure to achieve a passing grade in only 2 of the 3 exams required to qualify for university entrance sealed the deal. 1962. I was headed to Secretarial College and then to the workforce. My days at Putney High School were over. I walked up to an elegant and imposing building in one of London's classic Regency terraces. This was the home of the somewhat grandly named London College of Secretaries. We used to call it the London College of Sex. Here, I took courses in the skills of pitman shorthand and manual typing, both of which, along with my high school education, promised to equip me to get a good secretarial job. It so happened that I was rather proficient at shorthand and typing. I could take shorthand at an incredible 140 words a minute and be able to read it all back accurately. The Pitman method stood me in good stead for years after I moved into management positions. I always had a trick up my sleeve when the need arose to take fast and accurate notes. Typing was another success for me, racking up a very respectable 80 words a minute on the clunky old manual typewriters. The joy of successfully acquiring these skills gave me a much-needed confidence boost after the trial of school. Trailing along 3 years behind my high-achieving older sister Susan, a prize winner, competitive sports player, determined to gain a university degree, had marked my high school experience. When Susan completed her degree in French and German at Bristol University, she moved back home. I'm thinking about working in publishing, and although my BA is a good qualification for that, it may be useful to have shorthand and typing as well. Are you planning to join me at the London College of Secretaries? Yes, Mummy and Daddy think it's a good idea. I thought I'd enroll for the 6-month course starting this September. My heart sank. Oh no, not another opportunity to be compared to my brainy sister. Thankfully, it was not to be so. I thought you said it was easy to learn shorthand. I'm not finding it that way at all. Isn't it like learning German and French? You're pretty good at that. It is sort of another language. And those clunky old typewriters are hell. How on earth do you type so fast on them? Practice, 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 they say. I started looking for work with temp agencies. After a few placements, I applied for a job in advertising, a rapidly developing business, burgeoning since the end of World War II with the growth of consumerism. It was exciting to be hired by one of the big six, Mather and Crowther, not so exciting to be working for Jim Stratton, a rather skinny, small man with greasy greying hair who had been at the agency so long he seemed to blend in with the furniture and nobody took much notice of him. At 19, I was very naive and thought I had to do as the boss told me, even though I found much of what Jim Stratton expected from me as his secretary very distasteful. He frequently left for what he referred to as a business lunch, instructing me not to tell his wife where he was if she called. It soon became clear to me he had a mistress. Then I noticed he kept spare clothes at the office. The day he placed a pile of lipstick-stained shirts on my desk and said, "Janet, take these to the laundry when you go out on your lunch hour, will you?" Revolted by the smell of the shirts and insulted by the request, I knew I would not be there much longer. Secretarial position with Wedgwood caught my attention. I immediately telephoned and was given a time for an interview with Gordon Wright, Director of Advertising and Public Relations. Wigmore Street, in the heart of London's West End, close to all the big department stores, was lined with fine old buildings. I was familiar with the Wigmore Hall, an elegant and intimate concert venue built in 1901, and found the Wedgwood showroom right next door. The minute I stepped through the door, I could feel the genteel, relaxed environment and breathed a sigh of relief. Josiah Wedgwood and Sons, at that time a leading tableware manufacturer for the dining rooms of the nation, had an intimate, more friendly atmosphere than the advertising agency. Mr. Wright, a dark-haired man about my father's height and demeanor, with a gentle smile and polite manner, met me in the showroom. "Hello, you must be Miss McConachy. Welcome to Wedgwood." "Thank you. This is a lovely showroom." "We are proud of it," he said, as he escorted me up to his office. From that day until I left England, I was his secretary and personal assistant, which thankfully did not include private and personal errands or telling lies. After 2 years working at Wedgwood, I was restless for more challenge and responsibility. It didn't seem too likely there, where the only female executive was the press officer, not a job I aspired to. So many girls my age were emigrating to Canada and Australia in the 60s, where job prospects were much better and wages higher. I wondered, should I give it a try? See what life was like in a different country? Finally, cast off the yoke of the British class system? I went to Canada House and Australia House in central London and filled out application forms for both. Canada came through first. 2 days later, I made the call to my parents, announcing that I was planning to emigrate to Canada.
Medwyn's next reading is written in the voice of her mother, Phyllis.
Phyllis's story. Janet telephoned from her flat in London to announce she was planning to go to Canada. To say Doug and I were shocked is an understatement. We thought now she had a good job with Wedgwood and was living in a flat in Kensington, she might be satisfied and settle down. "You'd better come home for Sunday lunch. We'd like to discuss this as a family." Janet's older sister, Susan, joined us at the dining room table for a lovely leg of lamb lunch. Janet came home from the pub just as Doug was beginning to carve the joint. "I went to Canada House in Trafalgar Square and to the Australian High Commission on the Strand. I applied to both for immigration as a British subject. Canada House was the first to respond, so Canada it is. The Canadian government is so keen to get British-trained people, they will pay my fare. I would have to stay for 2 years and work where they send me. Then I'm free. They want nurses and secretaries, and with my education and experience, I'm sure it would be easy to find work." I was so cross that she had gone ahead without talking to us first. I knew anything I said would antagonize her, so I kept quiet and waited for Doug to respond. "I'm sure you understand, Janet, this is a big surprise for us. We thought you were happy at Wedgwood and enjoying your new life in Kensington. What has caused this idea of immigration?" "Well, Daddy, you know my boyfriend David. He spent 2 years traveling in Canada. His photo collection and stories are so interesting. I thought it would be a great adventure. Then, when I found out the Canadian government would pay my way, it seemed the way to get there." "That's all very well and good, but we need some time to think about this. I hope you understand we have your best interests at heart. We know you are enjoying your freedom in London. It's just that we never thought you would decide to leave the country." "I suppose it is a bit sudden for you, but I've been thinking about this for a while. I've written to Auntie Betty, and she said I can stay with them in Toronto when I land, so I'll be with family there." Now I was really upset. I glanced at Susan and could see by her face she was too. "Don't you think you should have talked to Mummy and Daddy first, Janet? It's a bit much to announce all this as a fait accompli without giving space for discussion." "Well, I knew you'd be against the whole idea. You never did support me." Old rivalries were the last thing we needed to hear about. Now, we don't need the two of you fighting at the table. Let's just say we need to talk about this. Perhaps you can come again next Sunday, Janet, after the rest of the family has had a chance to think. After Janet left, I felt like a bombshell had landed in the house. We were all too shaken up to talk any more, and had our first conversation about it the following evening. "I feel as if we have lost Janet. All we tried to instill in her about family duty has been to no avail. I'm upset she made so many arrangements before even talking to us about this. Betty knew about it before we did. It's a betrayal of family ties. I don't know what else to say about it." Doug responded, "Now, dear, we both know Janet is headstrong, and has always had her own ideas about her life. I did not want to be soothed. Yes, but it's one thing to leave home and live in London. This is a much bigger move. What if she never comes back? It's typical, said Susan. Janet's never satisfied with the status quo. I don't think it's fair that she's rushing into this plan without asking for your opinion. Doug tried again. She said she wants to go for 2 years. None of us know what will happen after that. I think it best we just talk about what's happening right now. How she will travel, what she will take with her, and when she plans to leave. It just seems so ungrateful after all we've done, how we've tried to give her what she wants. Phil, it's not going to help for us, for you to get worked up about this. Remember, we have 2 daughters, and Susan, so far, has shown every intention of living her life in England. Yes, Mummy, I'm not planning to leave the country. England is my home, and this is where I plan to stay. I stubbed out my cigarette and felt my anger and distress slowly drain away as I listened to Doug. He would offer to lend Janet the money for the trip over. He didn't like her idea of being beholden to the Canadian government. Susan had heard of 2 recent serious Boeing 707 crashes where many died. She was adamant Janet should not fly. The following week, when Janet came for lunch again, Susan suggested she travel on a Cunard passenger liner, and Doug offered to lend her the fare. Janet was delighted with the idea of sailing over and gave Susan a spontaneous hug. She also realized accepting Doug's offer would give her more freedom on arrival in Canada. So interesting to see the difference in my 2 daughters. Susan, careful and studious. Janet, casually flying by the seat of her pants most of the time, always somehow landing on her feet. The next few weeks were spent in a flurry of activities around Janet's impending departure, on a mid-October sailing from Southampton to Montreal, Canada. She moved back home into her old room, where we had lots of space to sort and pack. The daughter who could always make me laugh reappeared as Janet relaxed into family life, knowing we were helping her with her adventure. With all the preparation distracting me, I began to feel easier about Janet's plan. With Doug's encouragement, I decided not to worry anymore about how long Janet stayed away. She had never been away from home for any length of time. She would be so far away in a foreign country. I wondered if she was mature enough at 21 to look after herself.
Medwyn's final reading is written in the voice of her Aunt Betty.
Betty's welcome. Graham and I stood on the platform at Union Station, Toronto. It was Sunday, October 16th, 1966. Waiting to welcome Janet on the Montreal train after her voyage across the Atlantic, we were straining to see who could spot her first. I knew I would recognize her from my last trip to England 3 years before, when she had just finished her A-levels at Putney High School. The station was bursting at the seams with family members just like us, there to greet newly arrived immigrants from Britain. The scene brought back memories of our arrival in Toronto 10 years earlier, with all our worldly possessions, a baby and a toddler in tow. So much excitement, everybody crowded round. Then there she was. Taller than many, in a rich rust-coloured double-breasted wool coat with a big collar, striking hat and matching gloves, it was easy to spot her moving with her signature elegant stride as she followed a porter loaded with her suitcases. "Finally, I'm here. Thank you for coming to meet me. What a different world this is. First 7 days at sea, then the beautiful landscapes I saw on the train from Montreal. The whole journey has been amazing." "We're so happy to see you. Welcome to Canada. How was the trip?" "Let's get to the car, Betty. You can talk on the way home. It's too noisy and crowded here," Graham inserted with his usual impatience. Janet and I had become close during my trips home to visit my mother, Janet's grandmother. We were similar in many ways, and I could see how my influence brought her out of her shell. I could also see how it irritated my older sister Phyllis, Janet's mother. She was much more conservative than I and didn't want Janet to model herself after me with my love of a good party, my taste for bright colours, costume jewellery, high-heeled shoes, makeup and nail polish. Thinking back on those earlier days, I remembered now what seemed to be a pivotal conversation with Janet, still only 18. "Auntie Betty, I've been thinking about why you and Uncle Graham left England. Mostly, I wonder if your feelings were similar to mine about the constraints of the class system here." Listening carefully and hoping we would not be interrupted, I encouraged Janet to tell me more. "I feel so stifled in so many ways, at home and in a world where my aspirations never seem to fit. I despise the snobbish superior attitude from the wealthy towards the working class. We're middle class and suffer the reverse snobbery from people in the shops who perceive us as upstarts. And Mummy always disapproves of people I want to make friends with. It just didn't seem important to me where someone lives or how much their father earns. I'm more interested in who they are as a person." I heard such a strong echo of my own feelings when Graham and I had decided to leave England. I couldn't bear any longer living under my mother's constant disapproval, being looked down on by her, Phyllis, and the rest of the family because Graham worked in a trade. We were so much happier in Canada and financially much better off. When Janet wrote 3 years later and said she'd applied to emigrate to Canada, I was not a bit surprised. Janet's letter was followed by one from Phyllis, written in a thinly veiled tone of disapproval. "I just don't understand why Janet wants to leave England. She has achieved the independence she said she wanted by moving into a flat in Kensington. She has a good secretarial job with Wedgwood. She's only 21, far too young to be leaving the country. Perhaps you've been influencing her to leave us." I was struck by the irony in this letter. Phyllis got married at 21 to get away from home. I was also hurt by the inference that I had somehow lured Janet away from Phyllis. Standing there, I was filled with hope that this courageous young niece would find a good life in Canada, and I was happy to support her to set up in Toronto. Today was a bright sky, chilly autumn day with enough leaves still on the maple trees for a hint of our glorious fall colours, a perfect welcome for a newcomer.
You have been listening to Medwyn McConachy read from her creative nonfiction, memoir-based essays about her life from her late teens in England to late 20s in Canada. All our episodes are available as podcasts to stream or download on our website or from your favorite podcast provider. Our programs are created by my talented fellow producer, Ingrid Rose, Gary Sill, our in-house composer and sound engineer, and myself, Carol Harmon. Thanks for listening. If you have enjoyed this program, consider signing up for our free program announcement newsletter at writersradio.ca.
You have been listening to Writers Radio, a non-commercial collaborative project which presents talented writers reading their own work. These stories, essays, and conversations revisit the long tradition of oral storytelling that connects us to the inspiration behind the words. Be sure to check the website, writersradio.ca, to subscribe to our free notifications list. It's also a way of letting the writers know you are there and appreciating their creative work.
Writers Radio broadcasts from Half Moon Bay on the Sunshine Coast in Canada, traditional tribal land of the Sechelt Nation of the Coast Salish peoples. We express our gratitude for their wisdom teachings and land stewardship.